and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this Q&A for the film Trust Me. My name is Joanne Parsont. I am the Director of Education for the California Film Institute and the Mill Valley Film Festival, and it is my great pleasure to welcome our special guests today. I'd like to introduce Joe Phelps, the executive producer of the film, and Dr. Paul Zak, who is featured in the film. And maybe if both of you could give me a little background on your connection to the issue in the film and the issues that it addresses, and then we can kind of go from there.
Paul, you want to go first?
No, you take it, Joe.
Okay. In the early 90s, I started noticing this perception gap between what people thought the world was and what the data showed the world was. And I'd go on the street and start doing my own research and ask people if they thought crime was on the increase or decrease, and they would go, "Oh my God, it's out of control." And then the same thing with war and so forth. And so I was about to make some moves in my life to sell building and so forth, so I'd have some cash, and I thought I'd start this foundation, the Getting Better Foundation, and try to narrow that perception gap, because and this is where Dr. Zak comes in, is like when fear is high, people tend to not trust each other as much, and if they don't trust each other as much, they don't want to help each other as much, and it would seem like this insidious sickness, that was creeping through society that people really weren't that aware of. So started the foundation, and then I thought, well, if we're going to build trust through the truth, we better recruit an advisory board that has some credibility, because there are a lot of different truths out there. So let's go for the empirical truth. And so that's when we recruited Paul Zak and Steven Pinker and Matt Ridley and some really heavy thinkers and so forth to help us plan and put this thing together. And thought the best thing to do for this foundation and for this cause is to do a documentary that would be to media literacy what an inconvenient truth was to climate change, and in terms of raising awareness of the problem, because like I said, a lot of people really haven't focused on it as a problem or what the solutions are. So as we kept peeling back the onion, it became obvious that lack of media literacy was causing a lot of problems. And so in the beginning, it's like, well, look, here are the numbers. Look at the numbers. And then, but we know that people's eyes glaze over with numbers. They're emotionally driven, right, Paul? And so we got to have a story here. We got to have personal stories, and then we have to have the experts that can comment on those stories. So that's where Paul Zak and the others came in. And so we've got a film now. And thanks for inviting us to the festival.
Absolutely. Thanks for making the film. Paul, you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I've spent about 20 years studying the underlying neurologic basis for trust. And as Joe suggested, trust is really the glue of societies. If we don't trust each other, then we're all hermits, and we're trying to just survive the crisis that may or may not be happening. And so we lose all the value of social connections, of working together, right? All that becomes a lot of friction. So it's natural friction when you have humans together. But the work we've done and others show that our human nature is really one of cooperation, that it's not weird to put us in buildings, have us work together, or have them work on projects together. We're really designed to do that, just like ants and bees are designed to do that. Our anatomy sets that up. So having said that, what causes this cooperation to break down? High levels of stress are one of the factors that do that. So if I am feeding through the media all this noise that said, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and you better bar your windows and buy a gun and be ready for the Holocaust or something. You're not going to go out and meet your neighbors. You're not going to have an effective way to interact with folks. And in fact, your health and welfare is going to go down. You're going to get depressed and anxious, and you're going to live not as long. So those are all bad things. So I'm super happy to support Joe, the film, the foundation, so that we actually help people get a sense of how to think critically. And so, Joe, we have this phrase, pay attention. And that's exactly what happens to the brain. It's costly to attend to anything. And so it's hard to either just take stuff in and go, oh, well, so I love what you're doing. I love that we have an opportunity to think about, how do I think critically about the information that's just washing over us like a tidal wave all the time?
Right.
That's great work. So, there are obviously a lot of what I would say kind of terrifying and negative aspects to this issue. A lot of things, around what we've been seeing around media literacy and misinformation and the spread of that. But before we dig into some of that, I'm wondering if maybe to start off on a more positive note, if you could each share some sort of positive thoughts about the work that you're seeing in this space and where traction is being gained in improving our media literacy and stopping the spread of misinformation. So maybe we can lead with the positive side and kind of where you're seeing things maybe trend in a positive direction.
Well, for me, in the beginning, people would say, Joe, what do you think you're going to do here? This is a big mountain to climb. And my thoughts were, I don't know what the alternative is other than education. If freedom of the press is going to allow certain things, the inability to understand what's happening behind the scenes in technology is going to, our vigilance, our over-vigilance compared to what's needed in society today. So first I felt kind of all alone, climbing a mountain. And as I got into it, I found that there were, the big brains out there, the Paul Zaks, the Steve Pinkers, all these people, Barry Glassner and so forth, that were on top of this. And then as we got more into it, we got into you did, and Joanne probably may still be working with Namely and some other organizations. And at the end of the film, where people think the credits are coming on, we roll about 20 plus logos, basically saying to people, hey, if you want to know more about this, these are the people that are on the front lines. And this is where you can get more information, and maybe you want to help them. So I see, the problem, I think it's always been there, but I think it's been getting worse because of the technology moving faster than people's brains can keep up. I'm enthused because I see an army arising and things are getting done. Over.
Yeah, I'm actually, it's going to sound odd, but sort of enthusiastic about the breakdown of the traditional media. I think, there was such filtering, and I think it's gotten worse and worse because of the shrinking broadcast medium. The need to keep eyeballs on that screen just accentuates everything. It's not just it bleeds, it bleeds throughout the entire, news broadcast now. So as opposed to having a little more thoughtful approach. So again, Steve Pinker has written about this, Michael Shermer, many others, Matt Ridley, about slowing it down. So one piece of advice for individuals based on the neuroscience of acquiring new information is slow it down, right? Let your brain process information, particularly sleeping on it. So during sleep, we call consolidate. We consolidate information. We basically put it in bins, and then we throw out all that crazy stuff. That's the weird dreams you have. So we throw out some stuff that's not really relevant, and we sort of bin the stuff that is. And so before you get, overwhelmed about something that you've seen in the news or seen on YouTube or the phone, think about it a little bit. And also think, we're really good at giving each other advice. Joe, I don't know about you, but I love those friends who will push back on me anything I say. Like, really? Okay, well, so, cultivate those individuals who will give you honest feedback. And I think, as you get older, it's a little easier because, you just can't hurt my feelings at this point. So it's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, cool. All right. Tell me why. Let's have a discussion about that, and let's do it in a friendly way. So anyway, I think, we have more sources of information, and we know that all those are competing for our interest. which means we've got to be more and more skeptical. And so I need to have multiple sources and kind of weigh, what the source is. And then we're back to trust, right? What are my trusted sources? And maybe the answer is there are no trusted sources. And maybe that's a good thing. I'm not sure.
Oh, I love what you said about slow it down, because, 20 years ago, you didn't hear the word mindfulness very much, did you? And now that's key. And it's that moment between stimuli and response that makes the difference. And if I could go back in my career and count to 10 every time I was about to open my mouth, I still like myself and everything, but that stimuli and response and slow it down. Yeah. Don't forward that email kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. The concept of there, there are so many news sources. We're sharing this film obviously with students as well and with schools, and it was really comforting and inspiring to see the work that Valerie Ziegler was doing in the film with her students in the San Francisco Unified School District, as far as really teaching how to critically view and critically assess your sources. But it's a lot of work. How do we manage that workload, knowing that we have so much coming at us, but we don't have the time to then dissect and analyze it all. That if we, and do we run the risk of having, that sort of that negative tone that where we don't believe anything, then, where do we find the balance in that, I guess is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think in the olden days, we had the Walter Cronkite's who were seen, they're humans, they're all going to be biased, but, seen as kind of much more neutral. I do think the rise of podcasts has been a very useful approach, where you can spend 2 hours listening to people, hopefully, calmly debating something, discussing something, getting different views. And, I do think the echo chamber kind of approach where I just listen to people that, I think are my kind of people or whatever that means, is a little dangerous. But I think there are some great podcasters that bring in information from lots of sources and go, look, no one really knows anything. We're all just trying to figure stuff out. And if you believe, this is the most important thing ever, then you're in some kind of theological world where there's no, it's only black and white. The world's gray. So, I think if you accept gray, then you accept, we're just trying to get a little better, we're trying to understand something. COVID, climate change, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I got to listen to people who are really smart and see if I can kind of weigh those costs and benefits. Yeah,
there's determining a source of news or information. That's a big, hairy problem. It's complicated. For instance, one thing you have to do when you look at the sources is what is their profit motive? Is their profit motive to have highly credible content so that it represents quality and they have long-term longevity in their organization, or is it to get as many eyeballs as quick as they can and so forth, and bring a lot of crap to the world, and that's something that takes time, and I guess it goes back to basic human nature. If a young person's asking me what's the key to success, I think it's probably the people you hang out with all your life, and it's so the success in media literacy is who are you listening to, and it's a big hairy problem. Yeah, not simple.
So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the differences that maybe you're seeing between how young people and adults kind of learn and sustain their biases and how they unlearn them. Are you seeing that there's a difference in that process for different generations?
Over to the doctor.
Okay, yeah. There are some interesting, I think, really emerging research that older people do slow down decision making, partially because we have so much weird knowledge in our head, like those lyrics from 1970s pop songs that I can just bang out, but I don't know, for some reason. So I think, again, this has sort of slowing it down, where I think what we see in younger people is for good neurologic reasons, much more impulsive behaviors, kind of knee jerk. I heard this, therefore it's true. again, slow it down. Yeah, people with gray hair like me and Joe, we may actually know something, have been around the block a little bit, and be skeptical of the sources. So I do think what's good about younger people is since they're digital natives, they realize that a lot of what's online is kind of crap or is biased, let's say that. And there's a reason that, people are doing weird stuff to, get on YouTube or wherever. And so if you extrapolate that into news sources, you should be skeptical. I mean, I think what's scary is so many young people get their news sources from, Comedy Central, from, The Daily Show. And so again, I think slowing it down, think about, what that show is for. It's a comedy show, right? So, comedy has to have an element of truth, but it doesn't mean that what they're saying is truthful. So I think you have to be careful. I think, in a very real neurologic sense, you are what you consume, right? Physically, your food, but also the information you get in. If you're watching, murder shows every day, people getting killed, yeah, you're going to get anxious. I mean, you're telling your brain, I live in a world where everyone's getting murdered and, I shouldn't turn a corner without jumping. So I think, modulate your intake of information, and not only different sources, but, also relax, watch a funny movie and kick your feet up. That's all right too.
Yeah. And then turning that coin over, Princeton and New York Times, did some research that showed that the segment in society that is worse at sharing misinformation is those people over 65, because they grew up thinking if the television's saying it, it must be true, and so yeah, it's complicated, and we can't generalize too much about generations. I think every generation thinks the previous generation, the following generation, is not as good as the one that they're living in. But the millennials, my gosh, they seem to be much more socially responsible. We taught our parents to wear seatbelts, and they're teaching us to treat the environment better and so forth. So complicated.
Do you think it's easier though? Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry, Joanne. One thing that I did with my own kids is not answer questions for them, to ask them how they would figure it out. So what source of information would you get? What experiment would you run? And just from the early days, just ask them, have them think critically. Like, why is the sky blue? That's a great question. Okay, what's the sky made of? Okay, it's got air. It's got some different particles depending on different layers. What's hitting that air? Oh, the sun's hitting the air. Okay, so what happens when sun hits something like a prism? Okay, so you can work them through a way to understand why something's happening. But I think, if you're just a consumer of information and not actively trying to create more information yourself, create knowledge inside yourself, then again, your brain kind of gets stuck in this mode. I'm just going to suck in all the information and assume it's true. Really?
And
okay.
What
about the advertiser on that site? Go ahead.
Yeah, and like you see in the film, there with Valerie as the teacher, that today's students are learning media literacy. It's something that we'd never even heard the term when we were kids. So, when there's a problem, the human race will figure out how to solve it. It'll cause pain for a while, but we'll figure it out somehow.
Well, I'm just wondering that if sort of in light of what you were saying, Joe, about, that it tends to be people over 65 who, believe certain things and stick with it because that was how they were sort of trained to take in media, particularly news. If for young people, it might actually be easier for them to unlearn some of that information because they're raised in a space where there's so much, and that while we're teaching them the media literacy skills and to be skeptical, that maybe that this generation has a better chance of practicing the unlearning of those, that not everything that you read or hear on the news is true. If that seems to be
right. And one thing, and I don't have the research to back this up in terms of why that segment does that, but if one generation thinks the next generation is not as good, I think they might get an email or something that says, look what's happened here. And then they they send it on, they go, look what these kids are doing now, you know. See, the world is a bad place. The world's going to hell in a handbasket kind of thing. But the data shows a different story.
Well, and I want to go in light of talking about what Valerie's doing with her students. You know, are you seeing that that media literacy is getting taught more consistently in schools? I mean, my work in media literacy, I feel like it's still a pretty uphill battle. It's not part of the Common Core, but I'm wondering in the process of kind of making the film, or what, maybe Paul, what you've been seeing, if that's becoming a little more commonplace, and that Valerie is not just the exception.
Well, and Knight has just given us some help, the Knight Foundation, and they support the News Literacy Project. The News Literacy Project's writing a curriculum, and we're making this film available to the middle schools and the high schools in America. The film, in 90-minute film, we've got it broken down into 15 different segments, each one with a title card and so forth. So one chapter on confirmation bias, another chapter on deep fakes and so forth. So they can take it in bite-sized chunks in the classroom. So if there's a problem, the answers arise, and we're one of the soldiers in the Army that are bringing some of the answers.
Yeah, I mean, one way to kind of break down whether something seems reasonable or not is called the 6 whys. So why did this happen? Why did the next thing happen? And kind of just systematically go through and think about, you know, why was this posted on some social media channel? And I think, you know, going through that systematic way, and it's much more fun if you do it with the class, for sure, than trying to do it by yourself or with friends. But, you know, kind of go through each level. And it's just a way to think about, to kind of train yourself to be a informed consumer of information, as opposed to just you know, it bouncing off you and you assuming that it's correct.
Would I get those 6 whys if I Googled Paul Zak 6 whys?
No, sir. Just Google 6 whys. It's old approach.
That's an old approach. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll do
6 whys. Yeah.
So the vast majority of people who are, you know, buying into fake or misleading media messages are, you know, otherwise pretty intelligent, reasonable people. I mean, you can see that in the film. How do you explain their ability to be so easily manipulated? Is it just all about fear? I mean, what are you seeing as the root of what, you know, what makes it so easy for people who otherwise would probably go about a very logical process of, you know, like, how do we keep ourselves from being manipulated, knowing they're like, oh, I'm too smart to be manipulated. But then, you know, you watch this poor woman who's, you know, believes in not vaccinating her kid and goes through, you know, where's that all coming from?
You tell them, Paul.
Yeah, I think it's quite variable. I mean, I think one thing is we certainly see where I live in Southern California, you have people with high income who somehow think that they're smart on an area that they're not specialized in, right? So I think, you know, from the site, you know, I'll put my scientist hat on, I always assume I'm wrong. Anything I'm working on or anything you're working on, I'm assuming it's wrong. So I'm sure when I met Joe, you know, I probably said something sketchy to him, like, why do you want to start a foundation? What, you know, are people smart enough? And so that's just that's sort of training and personality, but a way to sort of think about probably what I'm thinking is wrong. And let me try to accumulate evidence that, you know, that I'm right, as opposed to kind of thinking, well, of course I know I'm right because, you know, I live in a nice house and I got an education at a good school. So you see this in lots of realms. So my friends who are investment advisors say that the worst investors are physicians, because obviously they're smart people, but they sort of think, if I'm smart in medicine, I should be smart. You know, how hard is it for me to invest in the stock market? So I think there's a lot of specialized knowledge. And what we see now in science is teams of specialists are getting larger and larger. That is, people have a deep understanding of smaller areas. And I think that's a good way to come in, is just think, you know what, I'm probably wrong about this. You know, again, for the areas that I'm clueless on, I just have to get enough information, and or just say, I don't know. And I think that's okay too. So I think, again, part of that's this maturity to go. I love it when I teach, you know, and students ask questions and they ask me a real hard question. I'm like, that's an awesome question. I have no idea. So I will jot that down and I will go do some research and figure it out. You stumped me, and that's totally fine. You know, as opposed to saying, well, you know, making something up, you know, just own up to it. I don't know. And I think it's beautiful to be around those people who both are skeptical, but also are willing to say, I don't really know. So I just, we should know what you know and know what you don't know. And I think knowing what you don't know is really, really hard. And I do think it's harder for younger people because you're acquiring so much information. You're around all these people and you're learning every day and you're in school. And I still have school-age kids and it's exciting. And you're just getting a thin slice of something. So,
yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to go back to 800,000 years ago and talk about how the dangerous world that we lived in set us up with conditioning that is so strong that it overpowers common sense nowadays. That sort of thing. In the beginning, the three stools for this movie was one, and this is where Steven Pinker and even Paul came in, which was the overvigilance that makes it so when we walk into a room and there's something of violence on the television, our eyes are immediately glued to it, right? And so we don't live in that world anymore where a caveman's going to come and drag you off by your hair and rape you, and it's a much safer world. So the segment in the film about the overvigilant parents that won't let their kids walk to school when crime is virtually at a 50-year low, and we walk to school, and if you don't get to walk to school, there's a lot of things you don't learn about, So talk about those kind of conditioning factors.
Yeah, I mean, these are, deep in the evolutionarily old parts of the brain where we have to be much more reactive to threat, or we didn't survive as a species. And so we still have that built in. So in an experiment I always do the first day of my behavioral science classes, I just walk behind one of the students and clap my hands, right? And they'll jump, right? That's what you're supposed to do. That's a loud noise you don't expect. You can train yourself not to do that. If you knew it was coming, you could probably suppress it. But if from behind, yeah, you should do that, right? And so, and then I always apologize to the student because it's not pleasant. So I think, all that, danger, world's going to hell in a handbasket, that is a loud clap behind your head that's just cranking you up all the time physiologically. And then once you're in that mode, that kind of survival mode, it's very difficult to take in and analyze information. That's why I said slow it down. So the areas in which this happens are, again, these old areas in the brain, deep in the brainstem, and the newer areas of the brain that is, sort of balance information and categorize it. That is longer to react, and we don't need that to survive. And so we've really got to take some time. If it's an important issue to you as an individual, then you should actually invest some time to really try to understand it. But yeah, that knee-jerk reaction is hard to get over. And the thing is, the knee-jerk reaction keeps you glued to a screen. So if we're getting all our information from a screen, crank it up to 11 and make sure this thing is the most scary thing ever.
Right.
So one response is just take in less information. So I stopped watching TV some years ago. I'm trying to be selective on the information I take in, and really think about whether the information is reliable or not. And I think that's where the film does a really great job to kind of give individuals a way to assess, is this information reasonable, reliable? Does it make sense? Is it consistent? So there's an old saying in biology that nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. So if you're finding something in biology that doesn't tell us about why not our species, but any species evolved, it's probably not right? So that's just a screen. So have that sort of screen. Why am I getting this information? Who's supporting it? Who are the sponsors of this? What's their goals? Right? What's their agenda? If I can think of one. And then if I can rule out all those things, I say, okay, well, they're probably having this kind of bias. And so that's the sort of 6 whys.
So I'm wondering, there's pretty extensive logical fact-based media coverage that's out there to try and counteract false information, but it doesn't seem to work. Why do you think that, there might be even though, what do you think prevents that from getting through to people? And how do we get over that obstacle in that case, where even if you have all that fact and logical information, it's not doing the trick?
Well, I think recency is a problem. that the last whisper you heard in your ear is much more powerful. That's one reason data really doesn't do it. My 95-year-old mother, I said, she was complaining about crime, and I said, "Mom, crime's at a 50-year low." And she says, "Oh no, just last week there was a murder over here in Springdale." So it was a recency versus the data. And look who's joined us. We got Sam Wineburg here. Okay,
Sam.
Hi, folks.
We're going to be wrapping up soon, but I would love to have you jump in, and maybe Sam, if you could just give us a little bit of background on your connection to the issues in the film, and maybe we've just been talking a little bit obviously about spread of false information, how people are processing, just anything you want to jump in on, given we're gonna run out of time with you shortly. I want to give you a chance to sort of jump into the fray.
So I am a professor at Stanford University, and in 2015, a year before the election of Donald Trump, we were working in high school classrooms and noticed a very disconcerting trend. Students who were otherwise critical thinkers and very good with print text, the minute they went onto the internet, there seemed to be a kind of closing of the shutters. We were then in one of a kind of act of Jungian synchronicity. We were contacted by a foundation in Chicago, the Robert McCormick Foundation, who asked us if we would put together an instrument to get a handle on young people's ability to make sense of the kind of information about political and social issues that flows across their screens. We did so, and we were just about to issue a report when I did a kind of teaser with an op-ed article in a publication called Education Week. And then I was contacted by a reporter at the Wall Street Journal named Sue Schellenbacher, who said, "Can I have an advanced copy of the report?" And right coinciding with Donald Trump's election, we had responses of close to 8,000 young people from middle school through university that showed basically that they really had no sense of what they were doing in trying to make determinations of credibility on the internet. So that's the short story. We've been working on that ever since. Most recently, with the help of google.org, we created a curriculum to try to intervene and move the needle on this. We have a large study that we completed in Lincoln, Nebraska, and you can move the needle, but it's going to take some effort.
Thank you, Sam. That was a very efficient update. So one of the things we started with at the beginning of this conversation was kind of looking at the positive news in all of this. And can you maybe expand a little on what you were just talking about where you're seeing that maybe you are pushing the needle a little and seeing some change, and where there's hope for how that can maybe be scalable and sustainable?
So absolutely. One of the biggest problems is that we are still reading the internet in a way that we developed as a way of reading during an analog time, the kind of slow, careful, critical thinking S pattern on a page. Unfortunately, it's sort of like preparing someone to drive a race car, but only giving them practice on a horse and buggy. The internet plays by very, very different rules. And we didn't really understand that as deeply as we understand it now until we went to New York City and Washington, D.C., and we interviewed in real time fact checkers working at the nation's leading publications. And we recorded them as they vetted information on the kinds of fact checking that they do day in and day out in their jobs. And we noticed something profoundly different from the other intelligent people that we watched with our tasks, which is when fact checkers come to an unfamiliar site, the way that they learn about it is not by staying on it, which is the opposite of what very intelligent people think they can do. Intelligent people who have good reading skills think that they can apply all of their critical thinking skills to digital text. Well, I have news for the listeners and for a lot of people out there. The sophistication of rogues and grifters on the internet is such that they could pull the wool over the eyes of many, many critical thinkers. And so this particular technique, lateral reading, and it's paradoxical. To learn about X, you don't spend a lot of time on X. You only come back to X after you've treated the web as a web. The way that we understand a particular node in a web is by understanding its relationship to other nodes. Think of a spider web. If I were to show you a single thread, you wouldn't know what it is. You only understand it in its relationship to its geometrical complexity. And similarly, the way that we understand something unfamiliar on the web is by turning to its webbed connections. And so by teaching that one strategy to students, we obviously don't solve all of the problems, but we can show that a significant bite out of the most common errors that young people make, we can change by just one powerful, flexible strategy. If you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't know what you're looking at it and who produced it, get out of Dodge.
God, I love your passion, Sam. That was good, man.
Great.
That was great.
Because and these guys too, we're sharing this with a lot of schools during the festival as well. So like any resources or suggestions that we can offer.
Sure, we have a curriculum that is either downloadable for free. Again, just in terms of being forthright and having everything on the table, it was supported by Google.org, and you can find it at cor.stanford.edu. It's been tested in a match control research experimental design. We have lovely data. You can go on the web and look at our work. We've shown that it can work in college classrooms, a piece that we had in the British Journal of Educational Psychology recently published. So again, I'm not telling tales out of school. We would never go public. We're a research outfit at Stanford University. We would never go public if we hadn't checked it out and ascertained that it actually does have an effect. cor.stanford.edu. COR stands for Civic Online Reasoning.
Awesome.
Good.
Great. Thank you, Sam. So I'm wondering too, one of the things around that, we talk a lot in the film about confirmation bias, and I think that's built into a lot of this that you've been talking about. But it seems like it's so much more prevalent these days, and I'm wondering if that's like a misperception. Is it inherent in our ability to curate our own news feeds, which is something we didn't really have the capacity to do just a decade ago? Is that in reinforcing our confirmation bias because we have the capacity to decide what it is we see at any given time? Does anyone
go, Sam?
I'll let other people speak. Confirmation bias is above my pay grade. We haven't figured out how to help the searcher of goodwill. And when we can first figure out how to help the searcher of goodwill, that person who goes to the internet and doesn't know whether N95 masks because their fibers are bigger than the molecules of the coronavirus, that they shouldn't. The searcher of goodwill who goes to the internet, we haven't figured out how to help that person. When I can figure that question out, then I'll go on to because we've been fighting confirmation bias since Cain killed Abel.
Right.
Yeah, and the neurologic answer is it's easy, right? So your brain, again, it's so metabolically costly to run. If I have to go and recreate the wheel and analyze everything, but if I say, oh, this source of information I like, I don't know what liking means, but I don't resonates with me in some way, or usually that means consistent with other information I have, and I'll just go keep getting that information. And so we end up, having more and more biases. And I think, as I said earlier, you've got to have some other source, a person, someone who'll debate you, someone, or the assumption that all that information is wrong, and then go back and try to recreate and go, okay, well, what parts of this does it make sense? Who's sending it to me? How do I develop a critical analysis of this? So I think the easiest thing is just start with assuming it's wrong, and then see what parts of that might be correct.
Hey, doctors, either one of you know, is there more confirmation bias now than there was when our founders were writing the Constitution? What does it look like on a line chart?
I don't think anyone's ever tested that, Joe. That's a great question. I think we do have so much more information now that it's easier to be confident in improper information. And so Joanne gave example of people don't vaccinate, their kids. Well, there is a source of information. It's all been debunked. It's nuts. It's a correlation that's being confounded with causation. So when
less time
diagnosed with different disorders.
Less time to think about it. Less time to be mindful, as opposed to when things were slower. That makes sense, Sam? Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you said about mindfulness, Joe. No, I didn't pick that up, but I do think, again, that slowing down is stopping, reflecting, stopping the information. So again, and just not getting it. So, getting earbuds in. So taking out the earbuds and going for a walk or going out in the country and just letting your brain process information as opposed to getting more and more in. So I notice that now, even like when I brush my teeth, I put a YouTube video on, and then I start thinking, what is wrong with me? Like, can't I spend 2 minutes by myself? But it's so easy. So I think we have to take a break. So a lot of people have advocated this, lots of words for it, but sort of internet Sabbath or something like that. Have a break. If you do it on whatever religion you were raised in, if any, choose a Saturday or Sunday and just say, I'm going to turn off the internet for one day and just be around the humans, be around myself, and maybe be around nature and slow it down. So slow down that information flow.
Given though, obviously the current state that we're in now, as far as with like these, multiple overlapping crises that we're dealing, globally, the pandemic, the protests, where I am, the fires, that there's just one thing after another, and that you're trying to gather information on all of those because it's literally critical, as you were sort of just describing, Sam, to your survival, about which mask you're using. Like right now I'm in a state, do I use my N95 mask for the smoke? Do I use my cloth mask for the virus? Like where, like with all of that, knowing that people are in that desperate need actually to gather information, how I feel like the problem is actually getting exacerbated as far as how we, how you can possibly slow that down when that level of anxiety is going along with it. Like, so I'm wondering maybe, Sam, too, like what you're seeing. I love, Sam, the way you talked about it being like sort of just that one simple thing. If we could change that one little thing, that being a very effective approach, because otherwise it feels really overwhelming. So like, I guess sort of as we get close to needing to wrap up too, just, what would be kind of that one thing that does feel much more accessible, given the fact that we're in this really state of constant anxiety and change, because also all this stuff is changing on a daily basis, so that when we think we have it down, something else shifts, and now you got to figure out, you're out there searching for more information to try and manage it again. I know that was not an easy.
I'm not sure whether your question is what's the simple thing that we can do that will alleviate our anxiety.
Not that.
Again, I can tell you about my meditation practice. It certainly helps.
I think it's more in the context of this, as far as the management of information is kind of what I'm asking about. What would be sort of the one thing that, because I feel like that's what's over. The anxiety is a whole other thing, and it's also a byproduct. But knowing that the anxiety is driving the need for the information, and the information is then flawed. Like, what's that one thing that helps? Like, how do we? I know it's not an easy question. I'm just looking for a good kind of wrapping up. Kind of give me something positive.
I can give you something positive. I think that before you press on something to forward it to your friends and family, think about the concept of digital pollution. Back in the 60s when I was growing up and we would go on a road trip, you would see people in the automobiles ahead of you taking the wrappers from their McDonald's hamburgers and throwing them out the window. It was not an odd occurrence. It took a generation for us to raise our consciousness that littering on the highway is not something a responsible citizen does. Similarly, digital littering is not something a responsible citizen does. When you pass something that is misleading or false or is a piece of disinformation that you don't know it is, but it speaks to your amygdala, it speaks to, again, as Paul was saying, it speaks to your confirmation bias because it seems to match your other beliefs. Before you send that on, stop and say, wait a second, am I contributing to the pollution of the information stream? And if you're unsure, spend 15 seconds, open up a couple new browser tabs, go to Snopes, look at fact check, look at a variety of fact checking sites. 15 seconds. 15 seconds can make our information environment far cleaner than it is today.
Nice. Joanne, one thing, Rocco, our director, is in the air coming back from a shoot in Texas. Couldn't make this, and I would just want to say something about Rocco Belich. I've being in advertising and public relations for 40 years, I've worked with a lot of creative people, and it was the greatest joy working with Rocco. These guys are shaking their head. They spent 2 hours with him. Boy, I've got 2 hours from each guy of these interviews, and there's a lot of stuff we have that's not in the film that we're going to do something with. But at any rate, he's a wonderful person and what I think is a great artist. And his Happy movie was quite the documentary success. And if you look at a bell curve, it's kind of like on one end of the bell curve, and Trust Me is on the other end of the bell curve in terms of tension. I'm jabbering on now, but I just want to say that there's probably young filmmakers that may be watching this, and they should look at Rocco's work and the way he interviews people to get them relaxed and speaking naturally and so forth. He just has a wonderful approach. And our idea of building trust through the truth, we held each other's feet to the fire all the way through to make sure that we talked the empirical truth. And he was great at that. And so I just didn't want this to be over without saying something about Rocco. And I see Sam was shaking his head too. So.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. We're sorry that he wasn't able to join us, but yeah, he's done some great work in the past. And we're running out of time. We got to move on to another Q&A, but I just want to thank you all so much for talking to me, for taking the time, Sam, for jumping on. I'm really glad we got a few minutes with you and some of your incredible insights. And Paul, thanks so much for everything you bring to the subject. And we're really eager for this film to get out in the world. So I'm hoping, Joe, that that's sort of part of the distribution plan is, getting it out to more and more audiences, so that just some of these really great suggestions will really hit the mark for more people. I think that's really the key is sharing this information.
We're going to get the film out to as many people as soon as we can, to the detriment of our own financials. This is a labor of love, man, and we got to get it out there. So.
Well, I hope we can help with that. Please, to our audience, please, spread the word now that you've seen the film, or if you're about to. Obviously, critical stuff in here, and we want to make sure everyone is getting those messages and supporting this work. So thank you all so much for your time. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Joanne. Bye-bye.
Bye.